Okay, in this particular exercise, we're going to talk about 360 video in relation to computer graphics. And this is going to be a little bit of a logical leap, but this is the best way that I've seen so far of making virtual reality under any circumstances. And the idea of virtual reality in this context is to create the actual environment and to allow the user to experience it as if they were there. So it's kind of like a video game, but you get to be inside it. And the way this works is we have to create not just one viewpoint, but all of them at once. Oddly enough, the way this breakthrough is made in the world of actual video was with what we call the Gopro cameras. Now, it's possible to use other cameras to do this, but these just happen to be the best. And the reason why is because they simulate human vision under some circumstances. And the funny thing about the GoPro cameras, as a cinematographer, they're really not very good. They have no zoom capability, and they basically just have a wide-angle lens and nothing else. Also, the early ones, you didn't even have a viewfinder. Basically, they were dashboard cameras, helmet cameras, and things like that. But the funny thing about the 360 video is essentially you don't want to focus on anything. You want to focus on everything at once. So this camera just happened to be the way to go. And the way they would do that is with a rig kind of like this. Now, this particular example was actually a 3D printed rig. You can buy them commercially. But what they do is they put the cameras in a position where they're looking in all directions at once. This is a cube with cameras looking out of each face of the cube. And the cameras have wide enough angles that they overlap. And so ultimately, the idea here is that you would take those different overlapping perspectives and map them into the inside of a sphere. And the result of this would be a 360 view of the entire scene. So you can look from one direction to the other, and it would just kind of spread it out there for you. And so that's really what we're doing here. And so you ask, how much would such a thing cost? Well, you had to buy 6 GoPro cameras and a rig, or you'd have to 3D print a rig, which would cost significantly less now that you know how to 3D print. But in the world of graphics, it doesn't have to cost anything at all. Okay, so here in Layout, we have what appears to be a train wreck. We have a whole bunch of cameras that just smashed into each other right down there, and a camera here that was the witness. So what we're looking at here is that 3D rig if it were expressed in terms of cameras. And of course, we've got some lights there that we can scoot out of the way. And the purpose of this 3D rig is to act like that GoPro setup. And there's only one object in the entire scene. If you go under Objects, and you'll see that it is a cube. The cube is in the center of those cameras, and the cameras are parented to it. So, for example, if I move the cube, I move the objects as well. Now, I could have used a null object, but I thought it more interesting to use an object that was based on more what the rig would actually have looked like. And so this is a reconstruction of the rig. Now, this file is called 3D World Base, 360 World Base.lws, and it's available on the website. It's an empty scene, has nothing but this in there, and those cameras have been formatted in such a way that they will simulate the GoPro cameras to the best of my ability. Okay, so the next thing we would do is we would begin creating the scene. Now, this is kind of important because the cameras are the only thing in the scene. But you want to have your objects ready, so you want to have this scene rehearsed so you know where to put things. And so we're going to put some stuff in the scene that will create an environment. Okay, so the scene I chose to load here is the very same model that was used in the Price of Admission movie. Basically, if you come in on this, you can see that's where the little coin drop happened. That's where that ball fell down the ramp there, and it went all the way down here, and ultimately to this bottom piece here where that big ball would roll off into oblivion. And so we're not going to use any of that animation or any of the dynamics, but we're just going to use this as a scene element. because it's relatively complicated. And what we want to do is we want to give the user the opportunity to look at different aspects of this on their own. So we're going to put the camera here on this main platform so they can look up at the tower here and over at the ball and maybe over here at the other elements there. So we'll start with that. So we select the cube object because that's where the cameras are. Now you notice that this looks really confusing because of all those camera icons. I'm going to show you a quick way you can fix that. If you go over to the Edit tab and go to General Options, in the second tab you're going to notice down here you've got 3 tabs, Camera View, and way over here you got Handles and Icons. And so I'm going to take my camera icon size down a little bit so the cameras get a little smaller. And we can work with it that way now because we're not going to be using the cameras for all that much. So if I got the cube selected, I can move the cube. Now if you move one of the cameras by accident, you got to move it back into position. But I'm going to take my camera cube, my GoPro rig, and I'm going to put it on this platform. So what I'm choosing here is the point of view that my user will have. And so if I get in on this, and you see at a certain point, well, we're still off the platform here. Now we're getting there. So at a certain point, I go through the platform. I'm going to put my user here. And so from that point I can see up at the tower there, I can see the rock there, I can see the railing, and can fine-tune that. And so if I were to go from perspective view into one of the camera views, let's say I look at camera 1, that is what camera 1 will see. It'll see that that particular aspect. Notice how distorted it is because these are wide-angle lenses. And we have to work that way. You'll see it all makes sense when you put them together. Camera 2 looks up there, and camera 3 looks over there, and camera 4 sees that, and camera 5 sees that, and camera 6 sees that. And some of these may be upside down in relation to each other, but the software that we're going to use will figure that out. Now, one thing that we do have to also remember is that the software that puts this together is called stitching software. It's important that every camera sees something, otherwise the software won't know how to stitch it. And so one of the things that we do to help that out is we can put a sky in the background. And so I'm going to just create a sky with clouds in it to give the camera some perspective, anything to be able to help clue it in as to where one camera ends and the other begins. So we're going to go under Windows here, and we're going to go into Backdrop Options, and I'm just going to basically go into, well, I guess this one already has it on there. Let me put Sky Tracer on, and so if I double click on Sky Tracer, we can see that we have clouds and we have suns. Now in this case, I have to make sure it knows where the sun is. I'm just going to say light. Light should be fine. And to find out if it's working, if you go to VPR, you should actually be able to see the clouds in the background. And that's basically all you got to do is turn that on. It's available for you in that particular program. If you don't like it, you can always change it. And of course you can add any background that you want, but that will provide some kind of perspective. And fortunately we don't have to look at it in VPR because that uses up a lot of computer power. But basically we have the clouds in the background will be a way of helping the cameras stitch together. So if we go back to perspective, we're also going to provide a little bit more help as well. We're going to put a few things in the sky. So for example, what would look more normal in this environment than a spaceship? So I'm going to load a spaceship. And so there's my ship, the Roanoke. Right now it's in the tower. And so I'm just going to go ahead and move that. I'm going to rotate it some. I'm just going to have that as part of the scene over in the distance here. And again, the reason is I want to give the computer more clues as to what's going on in different aspects of the frame. So that'll be the ship. Let's do something like that. And we're also going to put another one in. And this will be the Ultra Blitz, and let's move the Ultra Blitz so over on this side, and let's rotate that kind of like that. So once again, if I were to go into camera view, in some of those camera views, I can see the objects in the sky. And that may be enough. So the idea is we have all of these different perspectives. And so the hard part is going to be to render these all out as individual frames, because to make this work we're actually going to have 6 completely separate videos. Okay, so the animation itself doesn't have to be all that complicated. Now let's say that we want to do something interesting with this. Now let's start with the ship here. Now this ship is one of those kind that has to spin to get gravity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that element there, and I'm going to rotate it. And notice how it will rotate that entire section like it's spinning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to frame 1000, and I'm going to have that spin once. So I can put that in at say 360. So in the course of the animation, that would have spun once. So that's what the user would see watching this. And if I go back here, I can also have this one do a dance as well. And let's say that by frame 1000, I want that to move around in some strange way, maybe move a little closer to the scene. And so that gives us the basis for an animation. So the nice thing about this is the user doesn't have to see everything moving. The user just has to look around. So we can have these things moving if we want to, but essentially we're looking at basically a static image that has some basic movement in it, and that the user will decide what they want to look at and when. You can have all kinds of crazy things happening, but you can also have it be relatively tranquil. Okay, so then if you go to your render tabs and you go to your render globals, now we're going to talk about how we're going to make this happen. First of all, if you go to your general options, you'll want to include all the frames, so frame 1 to 1000. So that'll cover the whole animation. For the cameras, you must select which one. You have all 7 cameras. We're only going to use 6, of course. We'll start with camera 1, and notice it's got the aspect ratio 1920 by 1440, and the focal length is going to be the same. And output, this is where it's rather important. You have to be very specific here. So we're going to render these frames, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a new folder called VR360, and within VR360 we're going to make a folder called Cam1, and within Cam1 we're going to make all our files called Cam1. And in this case they're going to be PNG 24 because we want to include the background. And then basically we're going to let her rip. And you're going to have to do this 6 times. So we're going to get 1,000 frames of this viewpoint and then get 1,000 frames of the other one. So when you're done, you'll have 6 folders with 6,000 frames total. And then in the next video we'll show you how to put that together.